Consequences of this conflict even in the last 1 year. We have seen energy prices double. We have seen food prices sometimes more than double. It's not just prices for many countries. In fact, just accessing energy and food and fertilizer. These have been among three very visible consequences of this conflict. So when we say the world is difficult, it surely is not an exaggeration. If anything, it is an understatement given what is happening in Ukraine. A second reason is, of course, the COVID pandemic. What truly was a once-in-a-century happening. A happening which has left every corner of the world profoundly affected, where there is not a society which has not seen the loss of loved ones, not a family which has been left unaffected, and the socio-economic costs of this pandemic is still so big. I think the world is absorbing it, trying to come to terms with it. But there are very practical consequences for the world from this experience. We all saw that when the COVID started in 2020, that global supply chains, trade, the supply of goods to every corner of the world started to get affected. And this has left two lasting scars on the global economy. One, whether we are over-dependent on a particular geography, particular economy, particular country. And two, are our supply chains really resilient? If God forbid something else happens, do we have, if we were running the world as a business, for example, no big business in the world would ever rely on a single supplier. Nobody. And the world economy has, however, slid into that position. So how do we create more resilient, reliable supply chains? How do we diversify global production? And this is not just in terms of economy, it is also in terms of health security. So there are a whole set of issues which came out of the pandemic. And so you have Ukraine today as an immediate stress on the world. You have COVID as something which has been a serious, almost obsessive concern over the last few years. But remember, the world was not in a great state before that. One of the words we all learned during COVID was, do we have a pre-existing condition? The world had a pre-existing condition before COVID. There were already other problems in the world. And the COVID and Ukraine conflict actually made them worse. For a number of countries, they were already struggling with the model of globalization. They were worrying about debt. They were worrying about terms of trade which were going up and down. So what was happening was, and in many cases, the nature of globalization, because globalization is a very pervasive phenomenon which characterizes our era. A lot of companies, for example, found that their economies were affected by dumping of goods from abroad, which was done on a scale with which they could not compete. So a world already in difficulties had to deal with these issues. And all of that, in a sense, it's like layer upon layer. Today, these multiple layers have created a degree of stress. And that is the environment in which the G20 is taking place. Now, it's not just things that go off track. Sometimes there are new factors at play. And one of the factors at play is something which every person in this room is familiar with, because I see you all holding it in your hands, and that is digital. We still haven't fully appreciated how much digital has changed our lives. How much it has changed our life, because every time you look at that screen, you are learning something, but somebody else is also learning something about you. Your habits, your likes and dislikes, your demands, your preferences are all being captured even as you are looking at that screen. Now, it's not a matter of vanity, or it's not a matter of, well, somebody knows something about me. It actually is a deadly serious issue. Because if you were to look at the next generation, how will power among nations be determined? There was a time centuries ago which would be wealth, who has military power, who has most gold. There was an era where people said it was oil. Now, even this term, data is the new oil, what does it mean? It actually means that every digital transaction contributes to artificial intelligence, contributes to creation of capabilities which will actually determine what is the balance of power among nations in the coming years. So the big challenge today when it comes to anything digital is, you can put it in terms of data security, data privacy, but what it boils down to, it is this. Who sees your data? Who harvests your data? Who monetizes your data? Who utilizes your data? And what power do they have over you as a result of all of this? So if there is, just as I said in the world of manufacturing, if there is the big concern that we need more resilient, reliable, multiple supply chains, in the world of data, in the world of digital, we need more trusted, more transparent practices. How do you ensure privacy is respected? How do we make sure that the conveniences of life do not become a vulnerability for each one of us, and particularly for our nation as a collective? Now, this is really the scenario of the world, and it is a scenario where we have both an east-west friction, tension today flowing from Ukraine. We have a north-south developing tension, which is flowing from COVID, from what were the other issues that I'm talking about. Technology is a hugely complicating factor, and these are really the issues which the G20 in some form is expected to address. Now, we have taken on the presidency at this time, and again, it's a kind of a natural thought that when you take on a responsibility, your immediate focus is, okay, how do I do this well? And when you say, how do I do this well, it means holding meetings, summits, conferences, activities of various kinds, and we will do that. In fact, we will do that. We will not only do that, we will do it very differently from how other countries have done it. It will be done in, the G20 process involves about 200 meetings, and these 200 meetings will be taking place in every state of India. We want to spread it across different regions so that this is an opportunity, really. It's an extraordinary opportunity for actually the world to see India, the full diversity of India, because the impressions of the world very often are limited to, the very sharp images of India. When the world often thinks India, they actually think Delhi, or maybe a little bit beyond Delhi. So how do we get the world to appreciate this enormous diversity that we have, the great heritage, the natural wonders that we have? So the whole idea is really do the meetings across the country, different cities, different towns, and not just for the world to see. It's also a way today when every state, multiple, there are about 55, 56 cities and towns which will be hosting G20 events. It's also a way of getting India to be more, and Indians to be more aware of the world. And we have to be so, because we have to be ready for the world in an era of globalization as well. So we look at the G20 not just as an event, not just as a program. We see it as an opportunity that our people, our citizens, and especially our youth, today develop an awareness of the world, enhance an awareness, increase their interest, and for the world to have a better understanding of India at the same time. Now, having said that, it is one interesting question that when the rest of the world comes to India, what is the expectation that they have of India? And I put it to you that the expectations they have of India are actually quite exceptional. And they are exceptional for a variety of reasons, because if anybody, objective is looking at India, I think they would see in the last decade an enormous change in our country. A change which probably is most sharply reflected in the youth of the country. But a change in every way, a change in mindset, a change physically, a change in our aspirations. And I would say when we debate the G20, we need to be conscious of what is this changing expectation and why is there a change of expectation of India. And in a way, I am perhaps best placed to articulate that because, my job is to go abroad and talk to people. And in that process, particularly over the last 7-8 years, I have I have gathered a sense of the world's thinking about India. And that is something which today I would like to share with you. And what I did coming in here was, I tried to distill this into 10 points. The 10 different expectations that the world has with India. Because that is today their perception. This is how they have captured the changing India. And the first one, to my mind, is the contribution of India. Now, contribution has many senses, but I would talk about the one most literally applicable to the G20. Because remember, the G20, the mandate of the G20 is to promote economic development and growth. So, what is the contribution that the G20 thinks India would make? Now, some of you who would have seen the news today would, and if you haven't, I would encourage you to read a set of remarks by the managing director of the IMF, Kristalina Georgieva. She has pointed out that in what is otherwise, frankly, a fairly gloomy global economic scenario, to have a country like India with this GDP base growing at 7% and likely to continue, if not actually increase it in the coming decade, that is something about which the world has great expectations. And if I were to give it to you, in India, I would say, guys, we are growing at 7%. Everybody feels okay, good. I want you to see how the world looks at it. Kristalina Georgieva tells us 15% of the world's growth this year is going to come from India. So we are 15% of the solution that the G20 is looking for in terms of economic growth and development. But it isn't just, growth. The G20 is actually looking at how we have handled the COVID challenges. They note the vaccination, because remember, there are countries where there were vaccines but not enough vaccination. There were countries which didn't have vaccines and obviously not enough vaccination. So, and getting shots in the arm, which all of us have had, looks very easy when it is done. Believe me, when you go to countries which have struggled with that problem, and when you tell them, look, they all know the population of India. When they look at our numbers and actually say, okay, everybody eligible has actually got vaccinated, for them this is a staggering achievement. It's a staggering achievement also with the smoothness and the organization with which it is done. But the health was the most obvious. There was a time and I remember the very early meetings. Interestingly, it was actually a G20 meeting. We had a virtual G20 meeting very soon after the COVID became a global concern. So we're talking January of 2020. And, without being personal about it, the sense of the briefing to the G20 was, if there's any place in the world which is going to go under because of COVID, it is India. That was the sentiment. And it was not the sentiment of an individual, it was sentiment actually of a set of very serious people who had studied global health and came to the conclusion that our health system, our governance system, our ability as a society would not allow us to deal with the COVID. And 3 years later, we have actually shown them to be so wrong. Even they today marvel at where we have come. And come again, not just as a health and vaccination issue. How we have managed society, how we fed people during this period, how we put money in people's bank accounts. When you talk to them of those kinds of numbers, and a lot of this, and I really would urge you to look today at the delivery today of services in India. How much of it today is digital? That Aadhaar number has become like a magic number. That it is actually the backbone on which our daily existence today works. For hundreds of millions of people. So, if the world today has expectations, this contribution of India, it is an economic contribution, but it is an economic contribution that is underpinned by an enormous governance record, especially of a digital delivery. The second is actually the capability of India. The capability of India, including the talent of India. I spoke about digital, and you all had Mr. Narayan Murthy as a previous speaker. Our digital image is growing by leaps and bounds. It was growing initially like, India is the back office. Today, that's not the image of India anymore. It is seen today as the place, as society of innovation, of startups, of unicorns, of contract design, of manufacturing, and that, the perception among G20 economies that there is a capability and a talent today in India, and that capability and talent is actually very crucial for the progress of the global economy. That is something which has a huge impact on the rest of the world. And for me, one very interesting reflection of that is, for many years we have seen mobility of Indians, people who go out for looking for work. In the last few years, I have actually seen the reverse. Countries that come to us and say, can we have an agreement which would allow us in a legal, orderly, but efficient way to get Indian capability and talent, and we promise you we will give them the same terms and conditions as we give to our own people. And in the last few years, it's interesting, many of the societies, many of the countries which have come to us are actually the most insular and protected societies in the world. They include Japan, they include Germany, they include Austria, they include UK, Denmark, Portugal. So this demand, again, if I were to envisage the next decade, to me the demand for Indian talent, for Indian creativity, for Indian innovation, this is very big. And there is a whole lot of interest among G20 countries in India. The talented India, the capable India, which is what they are looking at. The third characteristic, I think, which is very, very strong in their collective thinking, is actually the generous India. The generous India, and if there is a single event which has shaped our image, and I think will shape our image for a generation, it is what we did during COVID. There's a lot I can say, but since I know this is a YouTube generation I'm talking to, I'll just give you a very, very simple solution. Just watch, it's 3 minutes. There is a foreign minister called Kamina Johnson-Smith of Jamaica. Watch her speak about vaccine mandate and how Jamaica was left to fend for itself, and that they did not even imagine that a country like India would go into that far away. This is the Caribbean that we are talking about. That, as far away as the Caribbean. And just listen to her. I can assure you, in fact, when she did it, I said it made my day. It's actually made my at least 6 months and running since then. The fourth characteristic, I think, which will be again very much in the minds of G20, is the higher profile of India. Higher profile, not just in going up the stage and looking good. Higher profile in actually shaping global pivots. And in the last decade, if you consider the key challenges of the world, climate change, terrorism, taxation, maritime security, even food. And sometimes it starts small. This year, for example, is something called the International Year of Millets. That we are very, very strongly pushing millets. That is ragi, bajra, jowar. And we are pushing it because it is actually climate friendly. It uses very little water. It is extremely nutritious. And by the way, most of our ancestors used to eat millets before wheat came into our lives, or rice came into our lives. So the push for millets actually has a serious possibility of significantly solving the world's grain demand. Because it can be grown today. The biggest constraint today to agricultural expansion is actually water. And it can be grown in a very massive way without actually significantly diverting water resources. But I cite millet, but there are other examples as well. We have been leaders of propagation of solar energy. That International Solar Alliance, which has today more than 100 members, was started by Prime Minister Narendra Modi at the Paris Climate Conference COP21. And today, if you see, there are big countries, small countries. The propagation we have done on solar, and not just propagation, we have done it backing it up by our own expanding capability in India. The fifth one I've done so far, an India that contributes, an India that is capable, an India that is generous, an India with a higher profile. It is actually a responsible India. A responsible India that within a day of an earthquake in Turkey was sending its field hospitals and its first responders out. Not again as an act of exception. We have done it, if you look in the last decade. We did it in the Nepal earthquake, we did it in the Sri Lankan mudslides, we did it in the Mozambique cyclone, we did it when there was a water crisis in the Maldives. And India today, which actually is willing to come to the help of other countries in distress. But, it's a tough world, and every country is finally judged, not just by what you do for others, but what you do for your own people. And if we are really to be a credible country, the world also watches us and says, okay, how does this country look after its people? And that too, you can see the change. You saw the change with Operation Ganga and Ukraine. You saw the change even during COVID. That during COVID, the Vande Bharat mission brought back more than 70 lakh of our citizens, and I think at least I have an interest in history. I cannot imagine in recorded history any country actually having that large a repatriation exercise. So we have today, and I'm saying this to you from practical experiences. Each of these propositions that I put before you, some minister, some president, some prime minister, some media person has actually come and spoken to me. So how did you get so quickly to Turkey? I mean, again, I would urge you, look, there are some really moving videos of our hospital in Turkey. Forget the Indians talking there. Listen to what the Turks are saying. So, the image, the message of a country that looks after its people, so that they are not a burden for other people, a country that is actually ready to go out to help the rest of the world, and a country, as I said, generous, that we are in the middle of our own vaccination, yet we had the largeness of heart to think about other people. That is really part of the expectation that G20 has of us. But every country also has its challenges, and you're also judged by the strength of your resolve. And no challenge is as sharp as a national security challenge. And in the last few years, we have been tested a long time on our western border. I think things are a little different now. I'm sure you'd agree. A few things have happened in 2016 and 2019, and we have been tested. We are still being tested on our northern borders. And how we come through those tests, our ability to stand up. We have today the image of a country which is willing to do what it takes to defend its national security interests, which is a very, very, it is a very forbearing country. It is a very patient country. It's not a country which goes around picking fights with other people. But it is a country which will not be pushed around. It is a country which will not allow its basic bottom line to be crossed. But then there are also the bigger debates. Sometimes, as I said, it's a very polarized world. Your polarized world is a nice way of saying different countries try to pressurize you. They urge you, sometimes they use some pretty strong words. Now, how do you stand up for your interests? And sometimes the interests of others who may not have the same ability and strength that you do. And we are seeing that today. I began by referring to the Ukraine conflict. I think the pressures which have come with that are also a moment when frankly, our sense of independence, our sense of confidence is tested. So, when we are seen as independent, when we are seen as not just only standing up for our rights, which we should and we are, but also becoming a voice of the global south. You actually had last month a consultation process as part of the G20, and this is the first time it has ever happened. We, as president of G20, at the level of Prime Minister, myself, Finance Minister, and Trade Minister, and Environment Minister, we actually, in the space of a few days, had a consultations with 125 countries. 125 countries of the global south at the Minister, Prime Minister, President level, so that we want to go into G20 saying, look, there's a large part of the world which is not sitting on that table, but they have legitimate interests. Somebody needs to speak up for them. So India today is perceived by the rest of the G20 not only as a voice of independence and I would say self-confidence, but also actually as a voice of the global south. And that too is something which shapes the perception. Now, you can have debates, but you have real life problems as well. And, a lot of how you are seen is dependent on the ability to provide solutions. And I would highlight to you today, we are seen as a solution provider. That if the Indo-Pacific today has a lack of capability to deal with common problems, problems of maritime security, problems of connectivity, these are actually, this is a responsibility for which India has come forward. India has come forward vis-a-vis its own region. Region in good times, or I would say in normal times, when we have tried to promote more projects. I mean, if you actually see the change in the region in our own immediate region in the last decade, we today export and in some cases import electricity from our neighbors. We provide fuel. The roads, rails, waterways to our neighbors has all, the infrastructure has come up. But that is one kind of responsibility. There are also responsibilities which come in a crisis. And we saw that with Sri Lanka. Last year, when Sri Lanka was really struggling, the truth is, other than us, there was nobody willing to come forward to help that country. I mean, it was we who took the decision saying, because normally when you have this kind of big crisis, everybody waits for everybody. There's some kind of security, okay, let's all do something together. If we had waited for everybody to come to do that, Sri Lanka would have gone down. And we took the decision. Prime Minister had the vision and I would say the belief that we need to not wait for other people. This is part of the solution providing, you could say, the generous side of India as well. Definitely the solution providing side of India. So where does this leave all of us? I think so far mostly I've spoken to you about very tangible things, security, economics, trade, infrastructure. There is also something a little bigger than that. It's the world of ideas, it's the world of culture, it's the world of history, of heritage, of tradition. Today the world sees India actually as a civilizational state. One of the few old civilizations that still continue as a nation. A civilizational state that is once again today reclaiming its place in the world. It is, some years ago we started at the Prime Minister's initiative this International Day of Yoga. He actually proposed it in a room in New York to a few of us. And sort of everybody looked at everybody, sort of wondering, okay, what do we do with this? But he was very convinced. He actually told us, no, go ahead, do it. See, you'll be surprised how much support you will get. And it actually was a resolution which passed the United Nations unanimously. And today, when I, as someone who spent a lifetime in international relations, I try to think what other big cultural event is there which is celebrated globally. And when I say globally, I mean globally. Last year, in fact, we had, for the first time, events which started with the sunrise at the international dateline. And as the sun moved, it actually went through the entire world, coming back to the dateline. Now, the International Day of Yoga is a great reminder, actually, of what our civilization is about. Now, it's one reminder, there could be others. It could be in wellness, it could be in lifestyle. We actually have a new initiative which was announced during the visit of the UN Secretary General called Life. How do you change your lifestyle for being kinder on the environment? It's something which all of us would know naturally. We all instinctively, it's a very, very small thing I'm telling you. Instinctively, each one of you, when you leave a room, switch off the light. Go abroad. Nobody does it. The richer the country, the fingers move less. So, I'm giving it to you as a very small example. That how much you can save, and this is very much, the drive which Prime Minister is making. We think, when you think of climate change, we say, we should get out of coal, we should find renewables, we should move to EVs. Yes, we should do all of that. But there's an enormous saving which actually comes from changing lifestyle. And changing lifestyle in many ways, if you actually emulate traditions and practices, which for whatever reason in the name of modernity were given up over the last many decades. Sometimes when I see, I still grew up in an era when we ate every day on banana leaves, at least in my grandparents' house. Today, when I see, what they come and say, sir, ye biodegradable hai. I want to say, yaar, I saw it when I was, 60 years ago in my childhood. So, I put it to you that in this world of ideas, culture, how do we today make that impact on the world? We have started. It's actually already visible. And I say this not just as a branding point or an image point. It's also a matter of cultural respect. That if there are traits, if there are beliefs and habits that I have, my beliefs and habits should get as much respect on the world as other people should. If there are places of faith for other cultures, why should there not be for me? If there are people who wear a kada or wear a turban, why should that not be respected? So, how do we get a more equal, in a sense more democratic world, where everybody's culture, the actual fundamental diversity of the world is actually respected? Because it is not. The fact is, because of 2 centuries of colonialism, what is considered modern and progressive actually was equated with being Western. And today that very big correction is taking place. And it's a correction which the rest of the G20 is actually watching in India. And, not all parts of the world are completely happy with it. I quite accept that. But I do think it's a very, very powerful development which is worthy of world attention. And finally, I think when our G20 guests come here, to me perhaps the most powerful impression which will be made on them, and I think it's an impression which they already have started forming in their mind, it is that of the future of India. It is the future of India because when they look at the energy, the enthusiasm, the creativity in India. I had a friend in Singapore. It was quite controversial for the sharpness of what he says sometimes. He actually said, every time I go to Europe, I feel depressed. If I want to feel optimistic, I come to India. So, sometimes it's nice for other people to say it, but as someone who probably travels more than any of you, if you see me looking, any pictures of my coming back to India looking very good, it's not because I've just had a good flight. I'm actually very pleased to be back here and seeing, that sentiment in India. So once again, it's really very, I thank you for the opportunity today, because I wanted this whole G20 exercise to be seen not as a program, but as part of a responsibility, part of a bigger development, part of a big change that is happening in the world. And I am very sure that, the G20 baton will move on as it will. But I'm very sure that, not just the G20, but the rest of the world will surely remember India's presidency. So once again,